with regards to the Muslims, an interesting history, economic history. In the Ottoman period in 1507, 58 silver aspers can buy 1 gold coin. After 82 years in 1589, 1 gold coin cost 62 aspers. That's only 7% inflation in 82 years. You get that in some European countries in 6 months. So this shows that there's greater stability. And we see in 1453, a rabbi, everyone knows who a rabbi is? It's like a Jewish priest, writing a letter to his persecuted brethren in Europe. He states, "Here in the land of the Turks, we have nothing to complain of. We possess great fortunes, much gold and silver in our hands, and we are not oppressed by heavy taxes, and our commerce is rich and unhindered." So this is the vision of the Islamic economic model, which I believe is an interesting model. I humbly suggest this as maybe a positive way forward to prevent global poverty, instability, boom and bust, credit crisis, and the various economic issues that have destroyed, I would argue, at least 3 billion people on this beloved planet of Mars. My last argument is a crime and social argument. It's about criminology, about crime and punishment, and about society. Now, I would argue Islam is a timeless religion because it has solutions to one of the #1 problems in the contemporary world. What are the #1 problems? Anyone can suggest some problems? War. Okay, apart from war. Alcohol, that's a problem? Is that a problem, guys? Yes, no, Okay, now I would argue one of the #1 problems are social breakdown and fragmentation and crime. Social fragmentation and breakdown and crime. Now, I have to set an ideological context first in order to discuss how Islam would deal with these problems. Now, generally speaking, from a political theory point of view, the West has an individualistic doctrine on political philosophy. This is why the professor and philosopher Will Kimlicka, he says that the bedrock to Western political theory is the notion of individual rights and personal freedoms. And I think the word here, individual, is important for us to extract it and analyze it. Now, the proposition of the main Western political philosophy is individualism. That's why the individual word must be taken into account. For example, the feminist philosopher, and yes, I'm a Muslim, I'm quoting a feminist philosopher, Marilyn Friedman, she states that individualism underlies some important versions of liberal political theory. And I think what she means here by liberal political theory is Western political theory in general, because liberalism is a disputatious doctrine of various types of political philosophies. Now, is individualism correct? Have we questioned this? We've just taken it for like a properly basic assumption, just like the external world exists. There's hard things, there's soft things we can feel and touch. But is individualism the way forward to view our politics, or our life, or things to do with man, life, and the universe? I would argue no. I would challenge this severely. This concept of rugged individualism which we have in America, I think is wrong, frankly, and it has contributed to a lot of the social problems we face today. Now, political philosopher Charles Taylor, he also states something similar. He says, the very idea of starting an argument whose foundation was the rights of the individual would have been strange and puzzling. Why do we begin to find it reasonable to start a political theory with an assertion of individual rights and to give these primacy? The answer to the question lies in hold on us of what I have called atomism, which he means individualism. Now, I would argue individualism is false from its basis because, one, there are social and communal attachments which determine the individual. If people study cognitive psychology, they would understand the development of the child is about social practice. The Piaget theory of the individualist constructor, that the child learns individually, is totally absurd now. They're moving away from this. The second point is individuality is dependent on aims and values. Because the human being is a vessel, is a carrier of aims and values, and aims and values must be considered in a social context. This is why the Jewish philosophers Shlomo Avineri and Avner de Shalit, they argue exactly my point. They say we cannot analyze their behavior as if they were abstract entities as if their values existed somewhere in the distance, outside, so to speak. This is a critique of the image of the person put forward by the individualists, who tend to distinguish between the one who has values and the one who is. Third point, there are dynamic links between society and the individual. Why do we reject society and just start with the individual? Surely there must be some form of relationship. Intuitively we know this. For example, the African saying is what? It takes a village to bring up a child. This is why the social constructionist Vivian Burr, she uses capitalism as an example to indicate the point. She says, for example, in a capitalist society, competition is fundamental. Society is structured around individuals and organizations that compete with each other for jobs, markets, etc. So that where competition is a fundamental feature of economic life, what you get is competitive people. So in other words, you put rubbish in, rubbish will come out. You put good in, and hopefully good will come out. Now, I would argue that the propagation of individualism and the individualist doctrine of rights and humanity has created social breakdown and crime. Not created, maybe a wrong word to use, it's too causal, but it has facilitated. For example, in February 2009, the Children's Society Report, it's a British organization, a Children's Society Report, they launched the report, A Good Childhood, Searching for Values in a Competitive Age. And it states, Britain and the US have more broken families than other countries, and our families are less cohesive in the way they live and eat together. British children are rougher with each other and live more riskily in terms of alcohol, drugs, and teenage pregnancy, and they are less inclined to stay in education. This comes against a background of much greater income inequality. Many more children live in relative poverty in Britain and the US. And what did they conclude? They conclude in this report that all of this is due to excessive individualism. Excessive individualism. And that's why it says, but we believe there is one common theme that links all these problems: excessive individualism. This was identified as the leading social evil in the Joseph Rowntree Foundation's consultation on social evils. Now let's look at some of the problems. Child abuse. In Britain, 7% of all children experience serious physical abuse at the hands of their parents. In the US, there's an estimated 3.6 million children who are accepted by state and local child protection agencies. What about treatment of women? Muslims always get accused of treating the women quite badly. Maybe we should turn the tables for once, please. Yeah? And this table includes 167 women in Britain get raped every day. 167 women get raped every day. That's 90,000 women a year. There's one incident of domestic violence reported to the police every minute in Britain. According to Amnesty International UK, 74% of men would report a dog to the animal services, which is called the RSPCA in Britain. But only about 50% of men would report a domestic violent incident to the police. What does that say about the view on women? Or about individualism itself? And the UK is not alone in this. In the US, a woman is raped every 6 minutes and battered every 15 seconds. And crime, for example, in the US, there's around 17,000 murders a year, 100,000 rapes, and around 12 million crimes per year in total. Now, I humbly suggest that maybe Islam has a positive say about this dynamic, this negative dynamic. Now, there's a lot to say about this. I'm going to allow a lot of the discussion to happen during the question and answers. But I'm going to try and discuss to you the social model of Islam. Okay. First and foremost, Islam does not base its premise on individualism. It rejects it. It doesn't mean it rejects individual rights, no, because individuals have rights. But the doctrine of individualism as a political philosophy, or as a premise for political philosophy, is rejected. One of the examples is that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, he said society is like a boat. You have an upper deck and a lower deck. Upper deck and lower deck. The upper deck is given fresh water to the lower deck. And the lower deck happily receive that water. Now one day, they become individualistic. And what do? They make a hole in the bottom what happens to the ship? It sinks. Society sinks. So this indicates strongly that those who explain